Hi, friends, and welcome to Marvelous Friends, your home for all things Marvel Cinematic Universe and beyond. I'm Rhett, and today I'm talking about the mysterious blonde woman that we've seen in the trailers for The Dark Phoenix. Roll that credit. To be honest, there isn't much to talk about when it comes to the Dark Phoenix movie that's coming out this weekend, and it's because of this as to why I have not really talked about it so far on the channel. Now, this isn't because I don't like the X-Men or I'm not excited about this movie. In fact, the X-Men are my favorite franchise and my first introduction into Marvel Comics as a kid. In fact, to this day, most of my favorite characters in Marvel come from the X-Men's roster. That being said, we have seen this story already in the original X-Men trilogy of the Double O's. In fact, based upon the trailers and what we've seen, it could be inferred that there's going to be quite a few similarities between these movies. We do see a standoff between Jean and the X-Men in a residential neighborhood. Most likely, again, this being Jean's home, where Xavier found her originally. We also know that due to a surge in her powers from the Phoenix Force, Jean will most likely clear out all the kind of secondary and non-named characters of the X-Men, much like she did in the original trilogy. We also know that eventually Xavier and Magneto will be working together to take down Jean Grey. And finally, we know that Jean's going to die. It's not necessarily in the trailer, but that is her fate in the story every single time. There are a few differences, though, that we can tell they're going to lead us down a slightly different version of the story. First and foremost, the rosters of characters are slightly different. Mainly the absence of Wolverine in the film, and the addition of Mystique as an X-Men. We also do have to register the fact that there is actually a much smaller roster of characters on the X-Men currently. Not only are we missing the likes of Wolverine, but there also is no Rogue, Iceman, Kitty Pryde, Colossus, and in fact we are missing the entire Brotherhood that followed Magneto. Because of this, there are fewer X-Men, which have allowed for more character development of the characters we do have, but does provide us with less powers and less soldiers to go up against Jean and her supercharged self once she inhabits the Dark Phoenix. So this does raise one major question as well. If we don't have Wolverine, whose regenerative powers were the main reason he was able to withstand the Phoenix Force and ultimately do what was needed, who is going to be the one that's going to take down Jean Grey at the end of this film? There's also one other roster change in this film that's raising a lot of questions, and that is who is this mysterious woman often seen speaking to Jean in the trailers. It appears that she is speaking on behalf of the Phoenix Force building up inside of Jean, as if the actual voice and physical presence of the Force itself. Something that's not traditional of the story in the comics, however, not something uncommon in the films. Many times in the films we see them using devices, characters, or story aspects from various stories to kind of bring together something that's unique and different for the fans. Something that's really important when you consider that the Dark Phoenix story has been done on this exact same chronological storyline of the X-Men. Of course, that chronological storyline, it doesn't matter because the original trilogy was, knocked out by the Days of Future Past story, which reset, and now, of course, the Phoenix Force is arriving on Earth about a decade year or so earlier. Time travel's crazy, isn't it? In fact, if you're betting on it, the odds are that 3-1, this is exactly who this character is. Now, it is important to note that it's illegal to bet on entertainment and on film in the United States, so these statistics are coming from the UK, where it is completely legal to do so. The other frontrunners are at 4-1 that she's a Skrull. Lysandra of Shira kind of lands in at 6-1 odds, and finally Cassandra Nova is at 5-4 odds. Now, you obviously know who the Skrull are, thanks to Captain Marvel introducing us to them fully. However, considering the X universe of Fox Entertainment doesn't really deal with the Kree or aliens, I'm going to go ahead and just kind of cut this one out completely and not really rule it in as an option. The other two, though, are maybe not characters or names that you specifically recognize off the top of your head. Leandra Naomi of Shi'ar is the Empress of her world. Her and Charles Xavier are actually ex-husband and wife due to annulment because of the events in the comics that actually involve our fourth candidate, Cassandra. She is exiled from her home planet by her brother and seeks refuge and allies on Earth. She happens across Charles Xavier and the X-Men, convincing them to help her by planting telekinetic visions of sorts in Charles Xavier's minds. After they come together, agree to work together, her and Xavier actually fall in love. Xavier returning to her planet as her consort and to help her take control back from her brother. The Phoenix Force also travels back with them. Using her powers, she drives her brother, Leandra's brother, mad and forces him out of the throne, allowing Leandra to take back control. Despite having the help of the Phoenix Force, Liandra ultimately decides to turn against the Phoenix Force and uses her power and influence to lead a galactic charge to destroy the Phoenix Force. We know in these films that Charles Xavier has only been really romantically linked to Moira, a very on-again, off-again, will-they-won't-they relationship that has popped up in both of these storyline films of the First Class arc. Now, to have Charles moved on, met someone, fell in love, married, and divorced someone else in the time period between Apocalypse and when this film is taking place is a big jump. And because of this, I would kind of rule out Liandra as being this character. The only kind of slightly plausible way of this being able to happen is if Liandra is a character acting in combination with the idea of it being the voice of the Phoenix Force. Liandra herself is an alien who possesses telekinetic abilities, and we know the Phoenix Force is a telekinetic energy that seeks out hosts who are telekinetic to inhabit. Then, of course, most of these hosts destroy everything they come in contact with, and eventually themselves as well, because the energy and the power of the Phoenix Force is just too much to handle. The only exception being Jean Grey, as she is a strong enough telekinetic mutant to handle this power. So we could see that the Phoenix Force is taking the form of its previous host, Liandra, and kind of relating and ultimately manipulating Jean Grey to its desire, using her more humanistic form. Cassandra Nova is a very interesting choice as well. She's actually a telekinetic parasite without an actual living form, meaning she was conceived in the womb with just being a telekinetic force with no body. However, while in the womb with Charles, she was able to use some of his DNA to create a humanoid form for herself to live within, which is a little bit different than normal parasites, as she doesn't actually have to latch on to a secondary host. Now, Charles is a very powerful telekinetic himself and was able to sense her growing next to him, and sensing the evil that she was, decided using his powers to stuff her out. This causing her to be stillborn, but her telekinetic parasite self still did survive, eventually detaching itself from Charles and building its own human form again. This then, of course, resurfacing during the events with Lysandra and herself coming forward and exposing herself as Charles' evil twin or dark shadow. Now, introducing Cassandra as the voice of the Phoenix Force would be a little bit easier, especially when you consider the fact that the Phoenix Force itself is also slightly parasitic in its ways of being. Now, how this would work is in the early parts of the film, we would come to learn as the audience that Cassandra lives within Charles Xavier. In the film scene that is going to most likely happen, as it's very particular to the story, we'll see that Charles will try to attempt to look inside Jean Grey's mind post the events of her being inhabited by the Phoenix Force itself. This to try to see what's going on and if he can help her with her struggling powers. The Phoenix Force being too much for him will eventually kick him out of this process. This could be the moment that Cassandra, sensing the strength of the Phoenix Force, decides to latch onto it instead of Charles. Then, realizing the Force and realizing what she could do with it, decides to kind of manipulate Jean to her will and the Phoenix Force as well. Now, which one of these is more likely is really tough to call. Especially considering the adaptations to the characters and the stories I created, I think both of them would work really well. However, for the sake of the video, if I had to pick one, I would probably lean more towards Cassandra myself, just because, like I said, I think she would be a little bit easier to introduce. Plus, I think her addition to having a secondary kind of set of motivation for the Phoenix Force would be a great enhancement to the story. In fact, this would also answer the great question of who would kill Jean Grey when that time comes in the story that I posed earlier in this video. At some point, I could see Jean Grey realizing that the Phoenix Force is not just inside her, but Cassandra as well, and Cassandra manipulating her to believe that the X-Men are trying to kill her when they're just trying to save her, and that, in fact, Cassandra is using her and manipulating her to get back at Charles Xavier, ultimately deciding to save who is left by imploding upon herself, thus destroying herself, Cassandra, and the Phoenix Force as well. Of course, we all know that in the instance, the Phoenix Force always does survive and eventually comes back, but in the mindset of this, film and the characters, they believe that this would kill the Phoenix Force. This, of course, would be a little bit too late, as we would see most of our X-Men killed off, maybe one or two of them surviving, but we do know that most of these will have to kind of be phased out in some way, considering that this is going to be the final film of this installment of the X-Men. After this, the X-Men will be taking a 5-year hiatus, according to the Marvel Studios, before they are reintroduced into the greater MCU. How about all of you, though? What do you think, or who do you think this mysterious woman is going to be that we will see in the Dark Phoenix? Do you think it's one of these, or do you think she's someone or something else? I'd love to hear what you have on your thoughts on this, and so let me know down in the comments below. Also, let me know, are you going to be seeing this movie this weekend, as I am? Now, on that, I will be posting a 5 and 5 review for the Dark Phoenix sometime early next week. So, to make sure you get that video, subscribe and set the alerts so you don't miss a thing. Until then, though, I love you all 3,000. I hope you have a marvelous rest of your day. And until then, bye, friend!